everyone. Welcome back to a Slice of Empathy podcast. Today's episode is going to be kind of a summary and reflection on 2024, as well as my intentions for 2025. I wanted to do an episode like this to kind of kick off the new year and also set some accountability with my goals for the new year, which are going to be a little bit different than years past. So honestly, I think we're just going to go ahead and start off with reflecting on 2024 as a whole. How should I summarize 2024? I think 2024 for me was one that really focused on resilience. There was a lot of change, big changes, life changes that have happened, a lot of new things, a lot of challenges. And it was really a year of growth, I would say. Yeah, a big year for growth. So I think 24 was really growth for me because of all changes, which I will get into. But honestly, like the first few months of 2024 were really nothing to really write home about. It's a very like January through March is generally pretty slow, post holidays for many people. So nothing really notable. In March, we went to Paris and London, which was our first big trip of the year. So we're getting ready for that, budgeting for that, all that good stuff. We connected with family after my husband's grandmother had passed away. And that was really nice because that was just before our trip. And we were in Europe for, I think it was 8 days total. We took a train from London to Paris and saw the London Eye, saw the Eiffel Tower, all the usual touristy stuff. It was a really, really great vacation. I loved it. It was freezing cold in London, however, only slightly warmer in Paris, but not by a lot. It was a blast. And about a week and a half after I came back from that trip, my whole department at work basically found out our positions were getting eliminated, which came as a shock to me after 8 years with the organization. And that was not a blow. I mean, it was a blessing in a way because I felt like towards the last couple of years I was there had been a lot of changes and not necessarily for the better, I would say. And I kind of got to a place where I had felt comfortable. It just felt like, this position is very stable. Why would I leave? And I think it was really eye-opening to me to really realize why a lot of folks move around every 2 to 3 years. And I know previous older generations typically tend to kind of look down on that. A lot of times it's advocated that, you should stay with your agency for at least 10, 20 years or a lifetime, your whole career. And that's just simply not really the case anymore. And honestly, it just really comes down to you're going to have to do what's best for you. But for me, I had reached a place where I just felt like this was kind of the glass ceiling. There wasn't really any more to go. But also I was kind of afraid to move on because I was afraid I was going to regret it. Until basically the universe, I feel like kind of stepped in and said, it's time. I feel like the universe has a way of kind of stepping in and telling you, it's time for you to move on to bigger and better things. And to this day, I look back, I still miss a lot of some of my colleagues that are still there. I miss them a lot. I miss our dynamics. It was definitely a different dynamic than my current position. And it took me about 4 months or so before I started my current position. I had actually received multiple offers in a very short span of time. So once, my resume was out there saturating the market, I had gotten probably about 3 offers in a 2-week span of time. I had gotten one earlier on in the summer, but it required a security clearance, which means that could have taken up to 6 months before I could start the position. And ultimately, I made the executive decision to choose another position that I felt was better suited for what I was looking for, my goals, all that good stuff. But that was really challenging because while I'm grateful for the number of offers I received, because I know it's a really tough market out there, this had never happened to me before. I honestly didn't know what to do. And I was afraid I was going to make the wrong choice. Like, oh my gosh, am I going to regret it? This and that. And so that was really hard for me. And ultimately, again, I feel like if anyone is in this position of having to evaluate multiple offers, my best advice would be to weigh a lot of pros and the cons. For example, if you have an opportunity to be hybrid or maybe fully remote, you might want to weigh that in against the salary requirements. I know a lot of folks who say, if it's fully remote, they'd take a pay cut. Let's say you might have to consider, say, maybe you got another offer that's maybe 20,000 more and maybe you're hybrid or something like that. Then it's going to really come down to the impact of that additional pay bump, how that's going to impact your finances, maybe potentially a better quality of life. So there's a lot of different factors that you have to weigh in. A lot of people will be like, oh, this pays more, but it's not the only thing. Like there's also benefits, and a lot of private organizations, typically benefits aren't as good. You usually have to pay in to them and whatnot. There's not a whole lot of job security. So there's a lot of different things to weigh in, as well as your goals and how you see this potential position kind of lining up with that. So ultimately, I chose a position that I felt would give me additional experience and growth that I was seeking for, or that I was seeking. And you feel like sometimes hindsight's 2020, but sometimes you'll kind of think back to where the road less traveled. I kind of wonder how things would have turned out. Maybe if I would have taken this position or that position or whatever. You kind of wonder. It's kind of like you're at a crossroads, right? And you're having to choose like which way you want to go, and you're really not sure. And that can bring a whole other onslaught of anxiety. At least it did for me. And I'm sure many other folks probably go through something similar. And it may not be black and white. Sometimes if you receive an offer or multiple offers, sometimes like there might be one that's like, yes, this is the one, it's a given. But sometimes like you can have some really competitive offers and you're like, wow, I really need to evaluate, okay, like, is this going to get me to where I need to go? And ultimately for me, so I'm not like dwelling on, oh, well, I wonder how things would have turned out if I would have taken that position. For me, it's a lot of reminders of coming down to my why. Why did I take this position? I wanted leadership opportunities. I wanted opportunities for advancement or whatever it is for you. Not everyone, like, for example, wants to be a manager. And I've talked to many folks about that. A lot of people don't want to manage people. And honestly, I can respect that. It's a lot of work. And honestly, kind of being in that role, I can kind of appreciate why folks may not want to have that responsibility. Because think about it, ultimately, your performance is going to be not based on the other person's performance that you're managing, but let's say if you are managing someone who isn't performing, ultimately their work is going to reflect on you. So if they're not doing a good job, then it's going to be seen as you're not doing a good job. Even though that may not necessarily be the case, whoever you're managing is going to basically be reflected on you. But I think like for me, whenever I think back to like my why I took this position, I'm like, okay, yes. So even if say for some reason this doesn't work out down the road, I can be like, this was the right decision at the time. At the time, this was the right decision. And ultimately, this is still going to be experience that I can apply to somewhere else, even if it doesn't work out, because any job can be like that. You're getting paid to do a job. It's not forever. Whether it be long-term or short-term, it's something that you can add to your resume. And I think we get so caught up in our jobs being our identities. And I certainly struggled with that, especially after being laid off after 8 years at one organization. I felt like, when I explained what I did for a living, that I was that. And a lot of times when I would explain what I did for work, I'd be like, we provide subsidized childcare for families and our mission is X, Y, and Z. So I feel like so many people can be caught up in that. You become like intertwined with your company's identity. And I think it's important to remember that you're being paid to do a job. And so you aren't this company. You aren't the job. This is like, sure, this is part of what you're doing. And you want to do work that you're proud of. But I think a lot of people get caught up in being intertwined. And So suddenly, once you are no longer with that organization or you're no longer doing that job, you're like, who am I? And I think so many people, there's a lot of stigma that comes with being laid off in general. You might feel like damaged goods, even though that's not necessarily the case. But a lot of times people feel like that. You feel like it's like a reflection on you or something that you did to be laid off. When in reality, a layoff is ultimately the responsibility of the company. It's a reflection on how that company is performing, not how necessarily you're performing, but it's a reflection of how that company is doing. They may lack the budget or the resources that are coming in to employ you. And unfortunately, your job is the one that ends up getting kind of caught up in that. So that was difficult. And this was back in April. And I live in Sacramento, so it also gets really hot. And that happened to have been the time where our AC went out. And I was laid off, and ACs are easily, I want to say on average, about 15 grand. You can get one, like if you get a basic one, you could probably get one for maybe just under 10,000. But we had to replace the whole AC. We had someone come out, and the AC itself was about 20 years old. So it had seen better days. And basically the last owners had did some basic, very cheap DIY just to keep that AC running. So honestly, repairing really wasn't an option just based on the age of that AC. That wouldn't really give us much leeway. But we wanted to wear, I think we paid we paid about 10, just over 10. We were honest with our contractors. We're like, look, we're planning to move within the next 4 years. We're not going to be here forever. We don't want to invest in something that's like top of the line. So we got something that, for us, it works. It does the job and it works. But unfortunately, for a good few months, probably most of the summer, we had to suffer without any sort of AC. And ironically, this happens to be the year where we have the most triple digits as in terms of weather. We have the most 100-degree days. Happens to work out like that. It was miserable. Would not recommend. So that was really tough. But a little bit more than halfway through the summer, we got it replaced. In the interim, actually, so about 2 months after I was laid off, I had actually had another job lined up, a part-time position that was lined up. And that had been lined up actually since the beginning of 2024. I had the opportunity to teach. This was my very first time. Actually, back in 2022, I had a recruiter reach out to me via LinkedIn and let me know about a position where I could teach digital marketing. And this would be like kind of like in the evenings, like kind of a side hustle a couple of times a week, basically. And I honestly was kind of intimidated. I almost thought maybe it was a scam at first, but actually I did all the interviews. Basically, I think second or third interview was doing a mock teaching session. And actually I was really nervous about it, but I did well enough. I passed and I got the position. So from there, what ended up happening is I had to wait for an available cohort to come up. And that took about a year. Because by the time I was first contacted late 2022, I did my interviews and such by spring of 2023. I had to wait about a year. So at the end of 2023, I heard from the recruiter saying that there was a couple upcoming cohorts. One unfortunately landed during the time I was going to be on vacation. So while I was in London and Paris. So unfortunately, that didn't really line up too well. So I ended up starting in June. So in the summertime. So it was really, really cool. I remember being so anxious about it. Like I've never taught before. And basically how it works is that you review all the rubric. There's a lot of training materials that you have to go through. And it's about 4.5 month boot camp for a digital marketing certification. So that was really interesting. So I started in June, and part of that, it was really hard because it was so hot. And I was like sweating, teaching at home, and it was so hot. And yeah, those first 2 months were really challenging just because it was just like I was like literally sweating while I was teaching. And again, like this was a brand new position for me. I was anxious. I wasn't sure how I was going to do teaching the subject matter. That ran through October. And I started my 9 to 5, my new 9 to 5 in August. So for about 2 months, I was simultaneously working both of these positions, which was very challenging. I know many people work multiple jobs. I've worked multiple jobs before, but this was actually my first time really. I want to say this was probably about 55 plus hours a week. And that was really challenging because I would go to my 9 to 5 because the first month I was fully in office because of training and everything. And then I would basically rush home. I would log onto my computer and I would teach my class until about 10 o'clock at night. So my days would start at about 7 a.m., actually earlier than that, because when I first started my new position, I was working like 7:30 to 4 for about a month or so. So when I came home, initially there was about an hour in between, and then I would start and then I would work till about 10. So my day would start about 6 a.m., give or take, and then end at about 10 p.m. And that went on for about 2 months until October. My cohort had ended. But it was an experience. I was working really long hours. I was really, really tired. I was basically simultaneously learning 2 new positions. And this was definitely a test of resilience, of strength, of grit. And I think my biggest takeaway from that experience was, well, I appreciate side hustles, and I give a lot of credit to anyone who can work a side hustle, but I also feel like being new at 2 new positions is really challenging. And I feel like it is really hard to give your full self to your main position when you're working so much. So for example, I kind of go back to high school with this, honestly, when I started working 20 hours a week and I was in school, I think from at this point, maybe 7:30 to 8 to 2:30 or so. And then I would work from 5:30 to maybe 10 when I was going to school, 5 to 10. And I remember when I was going to school and working that first year, my grades actually had started to slip a little bit. I was getting mostly A's and B's, and my grades had started to slip. And I think a lot of folks, in our society, in the United States, we are groomed to just go, 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 be productive, always be doing. But I think we really lack the awareness of how that can impact us. And I feel like I probably mentioned this before, but I would encourage anyone, honestly, if I had a kid or for any of you who may have kids, but honestly, I would recommend maybe a seasonal position or something that's not going to take a lot out of you or require a lot or require such a big commitment, because the job that I had reverted to about 40 hours a week during the time school was off. So during the holidays, I was actually working 40-hour weeks. It's been so long. I think, I don't remember if that was given to us as an option or if they changed at the time, but I remember it being a lot and I enjoyed it, but being in your mid 30s and up, you don't have quite the same resilience as you once did when you were, say, in high school and you're you're working 20 hours a week and going to school. But even then, I feel like there is a lot of correlation into how that affects your performance in either your school or your job, or maybe you're working 2 jobs. You can't be 100% at one or both of those positions because you're being pulled in every direction. So you're just being stretched so thin that you're not really allowing enough time for yourself to really recuperate and really be, for example, well rested. So it's funny. My husband and I were having a conversation recently about gigs and making extra money and stuff like that. And he recently started a new position a few months back as well. And so I really emphasized that I would find something that you can really kind of work around your main job. that's not going to take so much out of you, because ultimately, and sometimes I think we don't realize how it affects us and affects our performance. For wanting to really bring our A game to our 9 to 5, that's going to be harder if we have maybe a 5 to 9 that's really intense, like, 5 days a week. It's going to be really harder for us to come well rested, to bring our A game, to do our best work. And sometimes, like I said, we don't realize it. It could be making marginal errors, maybe we're a little bit extra tired. So it affects us in all different ways. So I really want to encourage anyone who's maybe thinking about a second job, or is, maybe going to school and working 2 jobs. It is really something that we want to consider, but I also want to be cognizant of, again, financially, you may have to, it might be necessary for you to work multiple positions to cover your bills. And I've been there. But if you are in a position to where, you're just kind of maybe looking to make a little bit extra cash, I would honestly evaluate where you can maybe cut spending. And it could be little things. It could be subscriptions. It could be eating out, or it could be a lot of things maybe we don't even really realize we're spending money on that are adding up. And I don't want to have that boomer mentality like, yeah, you don't get your coffees every day, because that's not what I'm saying. But there might be things that we're like, oh, wow, I actually don't really utilize this. And I think a lot of times that comes for me, like with subscriptions, because everything is a subscription now. And we don't really realize that, I'm actually not really using that. I could cancel that. And that can add up. So that's just like one such suggestion. And I was actually talking about this on a podcast recently as well. So that would just be like my one take of advice after working those 2 jobs concurrently. It was really I loved it, but it was really tough. And I felt like I couldn't bring my A game to either job 100% because I was stretched so thin. So that's just something you might want to keep in mind, especially, if this is a position that you really want to make the best impression, you want to do your best work. And so that really comes down to, you need to also take time for yourself in order to do that, to be that. So you want to take time at the end of the day, after a long work day, to unwind, take care of yourself, make sure you get to bed early. And honestly, that's been tough for me, to try and get enough sleep at night, as I'm sure that's probably the case for many of you as well. But it's really, really important, because if I'm sick or if I'm really, really tired, I can't focus. I can't bring my A game. So it's just something to consider if you are kind of in that boat. But yeah, so that it kind of taught me a lot, doing something that I've never done before, that I was so anxious about, and that actually ended up going really well, and that I actually really enjoyed. I was really surprised by that. And so at the end of the summer, we did have opportunity throughout the year, especially while I wasn't employed, to do like weekend trips, to do things that, normally I was like too tired on the weekend to do. Like when I was working, it's like, I just don't want to do anything this weekend. I used that time to really, do a lot of day trips, go out, go hiking, go to the beach, things that I kind of put off, or many of us just don't, like, I'm tired. I don't want to do anything. And then in September, we ended up taking a drive up to Vancouver. We bought a truck and a truck camper. And it was really cool because we didn't have to pay for any hotels. We used a website called Harvest Hosts. So basically, this is like a network of individuals that allow you to basically camp out in their parking lot, or the parking lot. This could be like a winery. This could be a business. This could be somebody's driveway at somebody's house. Just really depends. And so we utilized a lot of that while we were in Vancouver. It ended up working out really well. Everyone was really nice. So we didn't have to pay for any lodging. I will say, however, driving a diesel 25-year-old F-350 diesel truck is not cheap on gas. So probably the largest expense of that trip was the gas, driving it from Sacramento all the way to Vancouver, BC. This was my first time driving out of the country. And that was a really neat experience too, because just kind of like seeing like the whole process at border control. You learn about things you can't bring in. There's a lot of things you have to research ahead of time, going in and out of the States and, and through Canada. I feel like it's actually more rigorous in terms of what you can and can't bring back to the States versus going into Canada. I feel like there wasn't really a lot of restrictions coming into Canada versus coming back to the States. Like with the States, like there's a lot of fruits and vegetables, things like that you can bring. But yeah, so we stayed in Vancouver suburbs, and we visited X-Files locations. This had been on my bucket list for like 8 years, ever since the X-Files revival came back and it was shot in Vancouver. Honestly, we had a blast. We took a ferry over to Vancouver Island. We were actually just going to stay in Nanaimo, but I can understand why people are like, no, you have to see Victoria. So what we did, because we already prepaid for like the port transfers from the ports, is we just drove, I think it was like an hour and a half or something like that, from Nanaimo to Victoria. And it was so worth it. Like we're only there for a day, but we got up early in the morning and we just drove over there. And we managed to find parking. Surprisingly enough, like we managed to find parking. There were some areas in Vancouver that were really challenging, like Chinatown, for example. That's another downside of traveling in trip camper. Big rig, hard to find parking, right? Because, spots are generally like for cars. And then we ended up driving back. So we were there for a week. And that was our most recent trip. I'm excited because our next one coming up in 2025 is going to be over to Japan and Taiwan. I'm super excited about that. That's been on my bucket list for many years. So as we kind of wind down 2024, company that I did my teaching through had actually earlier in the year, they went through a bankruptcy. So the writing kind of had been on the wall, but in like early December, basically all of the educators, contractors, part-timers, full-timers were kind of brought together. We had a call. And so basically there was 2 different calls, and they pretty much told us that everyone's positions were being eliminated because they were eliminating the boot camp program, like as a whole, due to lack of enrollment, and they were moving in another direction. So fortunately for me, I was a contractor. So for me, it was a part-time position. However, many of my colleagues and peers, there are a lot of folks who were, this was their full-time job or part-time job. And as someone who was laid off from a full-time job early in the year, I could really sympathize, with understanding what's next. At this point for me, this was my second job, and this was my first and last cohort. It's a bummer, but that's going to be coming to an end actually in June of 2025. So basically my contract will come to an end June of 2025 once the last cohort finishes. So yeah, unfortunately that program was being eliminated. So all the educators are being eliminated, but basically we're being kept on for coverage. So, subbing for any shifts, existing cohorts. So that was a little bit of a bummer. So, like I had my first cohort, enjoyed it, looked forward to the next one, basically to find out that they're eliminating the boot camps. So that was kind of unfortunate, but it is what it is. And my 9 to 5, I really enjoy. It is very challenging at times, but it's something I really do enjoy. I feel like this was also another test of resilience. It's very much very self-taught. And again, I go back to like my why. My why was, this is something that's going to boost my resume. The other positions that I was offered did not. And there's a YouTuber I'd recommend. He's called a Life After Layoff. Really, really, really great guy. Really great channel. Really great content. Highly recommend if you are unemployed, you're in that boat, you're looking for a job. And he said that his recommendation was that any prospective position should be something that adds something to your resume that you don't already have. So each new position should be something that has a skill or something that you don't already have on your resume. So something you can add. And there was a position that I was offered that I felt like was a carbon copy of my last position at my last job. And really, really great company, a lot of promotional opportunities. However, at that point in time, considering like I wasn't feeling fully fulfilled at my last job, I'm like, this probably might not be the best choice. It's doing the exact same thing. I just don't really feel like I'd be challenged because I'd have to wait a year to promote. Whereas this other position is offering me these skills, these opportunities now with a bigger pay raise. So yeah, it's been a labor of love. It's definitely tested my resilience, but it's really shown to me like how flexible I can be in terms of learning new things. There's so much to learn, so many things to learn, especially like in a government or a state position. It's so much different than the private sector. So for me, it's my first time being in the public sector. So it's definitely a change so for any of you who've maybe like been in that spot, maybe you've come from public or private or worked in one or both of the two. I actually never really set out to get a government position. It just sort of happened. It's just like what ended up being the best offer and what worked best for me. And I know many of my friends, family members, a lot of folks who are like, I want a state job or I want a government job. And honestly, this is going to come back to what works best for you because it may not be for everyone. There's pros and cons to both. Typically, you're going to be paid more in private. However, there's not a lot of job security. So it's just really going to come down to like what you're looking for. So if maybe you're needing to make a significant amount of money in order to maybe afford to buy a home in an area that's really expensive. So that private sector job might be the way to go for you, especially if maybe you have a spouse that's, maybe they have a state or government job and you're on their benefits. So that's something that you might want to consider. So a lot of different opportunities for learning for me. And of course, I don't generally talk about politics on this channel, but I know November 5th was a very difficult day for many with Trump's election. Without going into it too much detail, many of you probably know why, who listen to this channel, know why that's a big deal for not even just the United States, but, all of our allies and the way it's going to affect us as citizens. And hopefully things end up turning out okay. But I know like for myself and many others, it was almost like a day of mourning. It was a big deal for many people's mental health. And so it was a difficult day for many people. And I just want to emphasize that. And on this podcast, we're all about empathy. And no matter which way you believe, I think those of us who are here about empathy, I think can get behind that, can get behind having empathy for others. So that's just my take on it. And kind of coming into the holiday season, I love the holidays. Christmas is my favorite time of year. It's my favorite holiday. But this holiday season was more challenging because of all the changes going through this entire year. And there are things that I haven't even touched on, that I haven't even gotten to detail about, maybe that I can share later on down the road. But I think it was more difficult this holiday season. I think honestly, going forward, I can get behind folks who start celebrating the holidays on the beginning of November. I think it is like right after Halloween, people start putting up the Christmas decorations. And honestly, I think I'm just going to do that because I'm like, well, I'm going to wait till after Thanksgiving, or I'm going to, at least wait till the 15th. Honestly, by the time Thanksgiving hits, I'm just so busy, like weekend to weekend. There's, and it's a good thing. Like there's, a whole lot of events and a lot of like gatherings and get-togethers and white elephant exchanges and, so many fun things, but it is busy. And honestly, I didn't have time to really to decorate as much as I wanted to. And honestly, so I think next year, I'm just going to get a head start. I'm going to start in November because things are just going to start getting crazy. And many of you probably can relate to that as well. Just like, you might be torn like, well, is it too early? I don't know. But then you kind of, as you kind of wait closer, Thanksgiving fell a little bit later this year. So it was at the end of November and we were coming back from a camping trip. And then, then you have work and everything. And so it's like, I just don't have the time. So I think honestly, next year, I'm November 1st, put up my Christmas tree and then I don't have to worry about it. Right. And again, don't get me wrong. I really do enjoy decorating. And I think I was frustrated that I lacked the time to really do so. I lacked the time to honestly watch a good Christmas movie. This is something that's happened in years past as well. So I want to make time, decorate early, get a head start on some things, try to make some time to slow down in between the chaos and the craziness and like being okay with that. So if like for those of you who are like on the fence, like, I don't know, maybe it's too early. Honestly, just do it when it works for you. I have had family members that have had their Christmas decorations up until like the end of January. Just do what works best for you. Some people even have them up through February, through Valentine's Day. Just do what works best for you. You do you, honestly. So I'm just going to start November 1st. I'm going to get a head start on it. And hopefully it'll be smooth sailing from there. But yeah, so like we had one of our cats be diagnosed with diabetes, and that's a very expensive process for the medication, for the vet visits, because you have to have multiple ones. And then having some plumbing issues. We had a leak through our ceiling, and this was all happening like around Christmas time. So in addition to like all of the like normal chaos, there was just a lot of additional things and challenges that we're having to go through. It was a little bit chaotic. And I think like for my husband and I, his dad passed away when he was young and his mom passed away like 11, 12 years ago now. And so with his grandmother having passed away in just before Christmas in 2023, the holidays really looked different this year. He didn't really get to spend time with his family. And I know, honestly, I kind of look forward to that too. I mean, and that's honestly because I have kind of a small family. And so I think honestly, when I married, I kind of hoped that, I'd marry into like a big family. And sometimes, life just doesn't always work out the way we wanted to. That's not really what happened. His family is close knit, but the reality is everyone is really spread out throughout different states. So we didn't get to see them this holiday season. And it's really hard to get a lot of my family like on board with different dates because, in-laws have their families that they visit and, so on and so forth, and figuring out what traditions we want to have or continue. It's really hard because you're dealing with a variety of different schedules within the family and you're trying to figure out new traditions because, my own grandparents have passed away too. And so for many of us, like our grandmothers or our grandparents were kind of like the matriarchs of the family. You would go over and visit your grandparents for the holidays. And I think with having so many like losses over the years, and of course that's part of life, holidays aren't quite the same. And I was just kind of feeling that this year. And so honestly, I know like Christmas time is hard for so many people. And now I can really understand why, especially if you've lost someone close. It just really changes the dynamic. And so I was kind of feeling bah humbug this holiday season. And my tree is still up. It's January 5th right now. And I'm like, well, I got a late start. I decorated around this time. So around December 5th is when I put Christmas tree up. And I'm like, well, should I take it down now? And so I'm thinking, within the next week, I might just kind of start taking it down, just so I can kind of start feeling the energy of the new year. And normally I'd be like, I don't know. I don't want to take my Christmas tree down. But I feel like this year, I kind of want to like move away like from the holidays and kind of just into the new year and to new things and kind of get a start on that. So that's how I'm kind of feeling. I'm curious, like if any of you might be feeling the same way. But that kind of brings me into like 2025 and intentions for 2025, because there's been a lot of growth, a lot of change this year. And so honestly, I definitely want to continue to travel. That's always a big thing for me. I'm going to hit a major bucket list milestone when going to Japan. I have a couple of other trips lined up, X-Files convention later on in the summer, and then going to Greece and potentially Quebec for the Christmas markets later in the year. So I have some trips planned I'm excited about. And so honestly, going into 2025, the first thing is a no spend. So I looked at my budget. I'm like, I spent way too much this holiday season on thinking about gifts, thinking about traveling or camping trips because we went down south. I got to really dial it in and really pull back on my budget, especially since I have the trip coming up this spring that I really want to focus on. So no spend January, really going to. So I think I'm going to do the pantry challenge. So basically that is the challenge to use up everything that's in your pantry. And how I like to do this challenge generally is when going to the store to only buy basically produce and then make things with items you already have. I got to do the freezer challenge as well. I got to do all that because I'm pretty well stocked up. So I need to kind of clean out my fridges, my freezers, my pantry. So that's the biggest challenge. And honestly, I don't really have a need for anything in this new year. I just really want to kind of dial it back and, save up for my trips. But also a big thing for me that I want to focus on this year compared to years past is rebuilding community. Because I think for a lot of us as adults, making friends and navigating new friendships is really challenging or can be challenging, can be difficult. So I want to spend time kind of networking in a way, meeting new people. And this past year, with facing a layoff and being extra busy and, working in those two positions for several months, I really didn't have time for it. And so when I really pulled back and I'm like, honestly, I'm feeling lonely. I want to make I want to meet some new people and make some connections because I think for a lot of us, a lot of friendships kind of go the natural course. Many people, they start having kids or they move away and we're kind of feeling that loneliness or that gap. And I'm an introvert, but there's still I think humans have that instinctive need for connection. And for me, I was really feeling that. Honestly, I've probably been feeling that for a little over a year, but I really started I'm going to really prioritize this year. I'm going to make time for this because this is important. Because when I looked at my schedule, I'm like, my schedule makes it really hard for me to be a good friend, to meet people. My schedule makes this challenging. So how can I prioritize this and really focus on this while also being able to meet my other obligations? So that's going to be a big focus for me this year in finding ways to open up my schedule to really invite community in, to invite friendship in, and invite relationships and new relationships in. And I think honestly, another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reach out to my friends I haven't talked to in a while. Be like, hey, how's it going? Let's meet up for brunch, I'm going to do that because I think so many of us we're waiting for that other person to reach out to me, and I used to be so hung up in that. I was waiting for the other person to make the first move or to initiate, right? So, but honestly, I'm just going to initiate it. Sometimes it's many of us in friendships, we might both be waiting for that other person to initiate and then no one initiates, right? So take this as a sign to, initiate it. I mean, you might be in a situation where you're feeling like things are one-sided and there's definitely some validity to that. There might be relationships where that other person maybe isn't so interested, you're not high on their priority list, right? But I would recommend reading this book, which is by Danielle Jackson, Fighting for Our Friendships. And she really lays it out the cold hard truth. And she kind of really dives into where a lot of us want all of our friends to be our number one bestie. But in reality, we might be number 3. And for us, we might feel that person's number 1. And so we may not be on an even ground. But I think also that might be something we want to be okay with, right? Because we have we might have many different friendships and different levels of it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But hey, it really comes down to, do I enjoy spending time with this person? The answer is yes, I really enjoy spending time with this person. Then reach out to them. That's something that I really want to do this year. The last couple of years, I think, honestly, during COVID, I think was when it really forced us to really kind of fight for our relationships in a way, because I remember having virtual meetups and get-togethers. We're all at home and we're all craving connection and we're finding ways to connect with one another. But since now things are kind of back to normal, we're working and we're doing all these things, I feel like COVID in a way was both a blessing and a curse in that way, because it kind of forced us to to find ways to connect, but now we don't really have that anymore. So now we're going to have to make an additional effort to connect with those friends, with those relationships. So let this be, I mean, for those of you who are like, I'm feeling lonely, I'm looking for, ways to, meet new people. It's really hard. And sometimes you can feel discouraged. For me, when I first moved to the Sacramento area, I used the Craigslist Platonics. They also have Bumble BFF, which actually I am trying out right now. And maybe in a later episode, I'll talk a little bit more about my experience with that. But Bumble BFF, Meetup, getting involved in different activities. If you're like involved in a church, that's also a really, really great way to make connections. I'm personally not a religious person, but I can see the benefits of why a lot of folks join the church, because you can actually meet so many people and develop so many friendships that way. So there's so many different ways, but those are just some tips that I would recommend. Meetup has been really great, but I would say Meetup is kind of like more like group meetups. I think Bumble BFF, if you give it a chance, is better if you're looking for kind of more of developing like those one-on-one friendships or relationships. So it really just depends on you. But for me, that's going to be like my 2025 resolution is connection, to build up community again. Just because, life happens. For me, a lot of folks move, or a lot of folks, they have families or just like, different priorities. And I think it happens to all of us. And so sometimes like we might have to just kind of put ourselves back out there and meet new people, because it's almost like a revolving door in a way where people will come in and out of our lives. And that's something that I have had a hard time accepting, because a lot of us will be like, oh yeah, our friends are forever, but it's not really the case, because sometimes our friendships can be seasonal depending on where we are or maybe where they are in a season. And I think I'm learning to be okay with that. And for that season that person is in your life, they made an impact on you in some way, shape, or form. And then they moved on, and then you have to wish them well. It's hard when friendships fade. I think that's something that many of us can relate to, especially as adults and making friendships. But yeah, that's going to be my biggest New Year's resolution, is building a community and connection, because in the last couple of years, I kind of let that fall by the wayside, and I need to make more time for it and be more intentional. At some point, I would love to host again. Years ago, when my husband and I first moved out to our apartments, we've hosted things at our apartments and really enjoyed it. It's something that I'd like to kind of get back to doing, and just kind of foster the community connection, and maybe, share some travel plans. And I love my job and career and all that, but I also want to invite some opportunity for connection. And if that's something on your bucket list, I encourage you to do that as well. Many people's resolutions during this time of year are to lose weight, and that's probably on my list as well. Maybe I can share a little bit more about that process later. I can't at the moment, but I do want to share about that down the road, my weight loss journey, but kind of coming later. It's not my number one, but I'd say maybe it's probably my close second to really kind of prioritize. I think health, not just like losing weight, but just like health, getting active again, and just like prioritizing healthy foods. But really, number one is connection. And I encourage any of you to find something that isn't weight related, because so many of us end up falling off the bandwagon when like, yes, I want to lose weight. And we're maybe successful with that for the first maybe month or two, and then we kind of fall off the bandwagon. So I would encourage you to find something else that you want to prioritize. I think for me also, I love to read, and I see a lot of people on Goodreads, they have a goal, like they want to read like 50 to 100 books. I'd like to get back to that as well. So those are my intentions for 2025. I wish all of you a happy new year. I hope 2025 brings you great things. Hoping your year has been going well so far. And yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening. And I hope this episode was helpful, but I feel like I needed this accountability to put this into the world, into the air, the void, to make this come true. Another really good way to do that is maybe to make a vision board. And a lot of people do that maybe through like Canva or something like that. where you can make a collage of things that you want to see happen for yourself in the becoming year. And then you can put it as your screensaver on your computer. Mine is still the same one from 2022. So maybe I'll do that. Maybe I won't. But I've heard that it's more likely to come true if it's something that you are looking at and thinking about every single day. It can be a physical mood board, maybe something you pin pictures to, maybe above your computer on your wall or something like that. But I also feel like verbalizing intentions is also a great way to be held accountable. So here's me doing that. And so hopefully by the time I come at you next year at the end of the year with everything that's happened in 2025, hopefully I will have been successful at that. So with that, happy 2025. And honestly, before we part ways, I want to kind of give you guys the rundown as to what to expect with this podcast. I think we are going to be going back to a every other week cadence. I was doing, at least when I wasn't working, I was doing every week. And I kind of continued that up until probably close to the end of the year. And then I took a break in December. I really needed the break. So thank you guys for being patient with that. But I think I'm going to go every other week. And that's also because my husband and I have started a YouTube channel and we are doing an every other week cadence. So it's just not possible right now for me to do every week in both endeavors. So I want to make sure that I put out, the best quality content possible and not burn myself out, because I feel like I kind of was starting to do that a little bit later in the year because I was interviewing several people a week, putting out a podcast episode every single week, in addition to working those two positions. And it was a lot of stress. But yeah, I want to continue this podcast because I really do enjoy it. But being realistic with my workload and other obligations, I think every 2 weeks with an occasional bonus episode will be appropriate. So look for the episodes, ideally every other Friday, 12 p.m. PST. You may see an occasional Saturday or something like that. But yeah, so that's what you can expect for 2025, every 2 weeks with an occasional bonus episode. I think that will work well for us in the new year. And yeah, wish everyone the best 2025. And we have some great guests coming up, and I can't wait to share what's in store for 2025. We have a great lineup. I can't wait to share it with you. So thank you guys for your patience, and we will talk later.